Today, we're going to talk about something unique that's never happened in Magic the Gathering before. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles, and welcome to my video discussing a brand new card from War of the Spark, something that we have not seen yet. We have seen similar cards, but we haven't seen anything exactly like this before. This is a trend setter, something that's breaking new ground, especially for the color red. So the card we're talking about today, obviously, sometimes I'll lead you along and end up with the cards, and sometimes we start out right with the card to begin with. We're going to start with the card right away and go from there. We are going to talk about Role Reversal. So this is 2 blue and a red. It's a sorcery. What it does is you exchange control of 2 target permanents that share a permanent type. Now we'll come back and discuss the flavor, text, the picture, all of that. But first, I just want to address the ability, because this is what we haven't seen in Magic before, specifically in blue-red. Now, historically, we have had some cards with very similar abilities in the past, and one that has an identical ability but only exists in one of the colors and is a lot more expensive to cast. Not nearly as good a card. So let's start out way back in the days of Legends with Gauntlets of Chaos. This is the first swappy style effect that Magic ever really had. It's a 5 casting cost artifact, and for 5 mana, so it costs 10 mana in total to do this. It's obviously very expensive, but anyhow, 5 mana, sacrifice Gauntlets of Chaos, choose a target artifact, creature, or land opponent controls, and a target permanent you control of the same type. Then you exchange control of those permanents, and as an interesting side note, bury any enchantments played on these permanents. For those of you who don't know what that means, bury just means destroy without the possibility of regeneration. It's an old school keyword that they removed from the game. At a certain point, Magic the Gathering removed all demons and all references of that nature from the game, and at the same time, they got rid of the term buried, and they haven't come up with a new term for destroyed without possibility of regeneration, and I don't understand why. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to include destroyed. This card can't be regenerated, and it does save on word space. But again, we've never seen a replacement for it. For some reason, maybe it's just they can't come up with anything that really feels like it makes sense, because in all honesty, when you look at the word buried, it's still like, well, wait, why can't this be regenerated? But anyways, for some reason, Gauntlets of Chaos will let you swap permanents with your opponent of the 3 selected type. Not all types, just obviously artifact, creature, and lands, but it'll get rid of the enchantments. And that's kind of a weird little rider to add on to the ability. But overall, this is a super expensive way to do things. It costs you 10 mana in total. I always found the artwork to be really just kind of confusing. I'm like, is this guy pulling a tarp over, is he pulling a tarp over a bramble field? Like, I still to this day don't know what this art's supposed to represent. Like, is it like this is supposed to be an exchange of some type, but is it 2 people each wearing it? Like, the artwork has always just made my brain go, what? I mean, it's cool artwork, but it's confusing. I still don't know what the deal is. Beefy McMeat Arms wants to stretch a sheet that's ripping over a thorny field? I don't know. Is that ripping sheet supposed to be an enchantment that's getting destroyed in the exchange? Are they tucking a thorn bed in for sleep? Like, what is going on with Gauntlets of Chaos? I'll never know. So Gauntlets of Chaos was the first time we saw an effect like this. They cleaned up the effect and made it a little more understandable and assigned it to a color when they made the spell Legerdemain. It might not be the way you pronounce it. I might be butchering the pronunciation. But anyways, it's 2 blue, 2 colorless. Exchange control of target artifact or creature and another target permanent that shares one of those types with it. So that again is another, we're going to do an exchange. 1 permanent, it's got to be the same type. The flavor text says, Squee tucked the warm ball in his pocket and slipped a pebble in its place. Glock, he mumbled and hid. And this is just him messing around with like something that belongs as part of the Weatherlight's treasure trove. In all honesty, the card artwork is just kind of to me, but I thought it was a cool concept. I really like the idea of like exchanging, like magic just being like, poof, here you go. If you're not going to steal something straight up, like, I mean, with Legerdemain, you look at it and you're like, well, I could just use steal artifact or control magic, and those would accomplish the same sort of thing. So it's not really that great a card, especially for 4 mana. Now, they finally made a full-on version of just exchange 2 permanents. That didn't show up until the cons block. So we're talking like forever. We're talking well over a decade later, did they finally just straight up make a card that lets you exchange control of 2 target permanents that share a card type. Now, this costs 6 mana and is not a very good card, obviously. So the artwork just shows a couple of people there. Basically, it's supposed to be like, check it out, we got the ogres and the monks allied together. Show the enemy the true path, and the spirit will yearn to follow it. It's kind of like the monks have swayed like what I assume is a red aligned ogre warrior over to their side, and they've got like the little bit of blue magic that's located right up here in his forehead to show that to you. So blue has a number of these exchange sort of scenarios. Red actually only really has one that falls into the exchange, and that is Confusion in the Ranks. Now, this one's actually an enchantment. It's 5 mana enchantment. Whenever an artifact, creature, or enchantment comes into play, its controller chooses target permanent another player controls. It shares a type with it. Exchange control of those permanents. So this is, honestly, it's a different style card. I mean, first of all, it forces the exchange. Secondly, it deals with enchantments, which red really normally has a pretty hard time dealing with enchantments. Red is normally not allowed to interact with enchantments, but because it's a sort of like, here, we're just gonna swap back and forth style setup, it's allowable as a red card. But this is really the only red let's trade card that exists. There are no other red cards that do a swap up the same way. Now, going back to role reversal, if we look at that, this thing only costs 3 mana. So it's way cheaper than any of the other effects. Basically, it's half the cost of shifting loyalty, and that makes it a lot more attractive. It makes it move into the realm of playability. Let's take a look at the flavor of the card now. So you have to put together the card artwork and the flavor text together for this all to work, because otherwise you might not immediately understand exactly what you're seeing here. So with the flavor text, we have, actually, let's start with the artwork. With the artwork, we have a Sphinx wielding a gigantic barbed mace with red streams of magic flowing away from his eyes and a big, gleeful, like mayhem-style grin on his face. And beside him, in the forefront, we have a goblin in a meditative pose, a very much a Sphinx-like pose, actually. If you see most Sphinxes, they are shown stationary, right? In this artwork, we have the dynamic movement of the Sphinx, which is actually moving forward with his mace with glee. And then you have the goblin who's staying stationary in a very Sphinx-like pose. And I love the contrast, because normally you would see the goblin to be the one swinging a big old mace of doom and going, ah! And you have the goblin just sitting there. His mouth is closed. His head's kind of upturned. He's in meditation, essentially. So the flavor text goes on to say, Uthin the Wise scandalized Sphinx society, hooting the answers to riddles as he rampaged through Tin Street. Grangle, on the other hand, sat for hours deep in thought, largely ignored by fellow goblins. This flavor text is a lot of fun. Starting with the names, you've got Uthlon the Wise. That's a great name for a Sphinx. Gives you the concept of him. And Grangle. It sounds very similar to Strangle and Grungy, and it's a very goblin-feeling name. It's more of a gutsy sort of name. So when it comes to the whole Uthin scandalized Sphinx society, hooting the answers to riddles, if you take a look, there are a number of Sphinxes in Magic the Gathering that are shown in sort of repose, just kind of resting, just like the goblin, mentioning specifically riddles. Sharum the Hegemon's flavor text says, to gain an audience with the Hegemon, one must bring a riddle she has not heard. So, obviously, Sphinxes collect up riddles. Then you take a look at Sphinx of Magosi. Again, not shown going into great action, standing up on like a cliff face, just there, regal looking. A riddle is nothing more than a trap for small minds, baited with the promise of understanding. And Sphinxes rarely actually deliver on that understanding. You must show them you've come to the understanding on your own. And this continues on. You see Sphinx of the Steelwind. No one has properly answered her favorite riddle. Why should I spare your life? That's a different twist I don't even know if that really counts as a riddle, but it is a fun way of tying in the whole Sphinx riddle thing. And the Sphinx of the Steelwind does have the I'm here stationary, but also more an opposed I'm going to come at you kind of way, which works well with the flavor text. And then following that up, the final Sphinx that I'm going to show you to demonstrate the riddle concept is the flavor text on Yannette Cryptic Sovereign, who again is just kind of languidly laying out on top of these stone stairs, just waiting for someone to come by. She talks using riddles her disciples alone can unravel. So we can clearly see from other Sphinxes in Magic the Gathering that riddles are integral to their society. It's basically what Uthlon's doing is just unheard of. First of all, for him to be rampaging along and going nuts running down Tin Street, completely unacceptable. There's a certain level of decorum expected among Sphinxes. But to be hooting out the answers to riddles, that is verboten. You cannot be doing that. That is the sort of forbidden activity that completely would scandalize Sphinx society. So for me, that's an absolute flavor win. And then you have on the opposite side of the scale, you have Grangle, who is basically just sitting still for hours on end, like a Sphinx would, deep in thought, meditating on riddles, meditating on the secrets of life, because he now has the role of a Sphinx. The Sphinx mentality has been embedded into him, and he's largely ignored by his fellow goblins, who would just be like, what's wrong with Grangle? Grangle, come on, shouldn't we be looting? And no, Grangle's just quietly sitting there, just doing his pose, just staring off into infinity as he ponders the mysteries of the universe. I really love the juxtaposition between a wise Sphinx and an unruly, just gutter dweller. I mean, that's what these goblins are, right? They're basically gutter rats. So you've got a gutter rat and then a Sphinx, just this proud regal Sphinx. And the way that they have shown the concept between the two, I really love it. The Sphinx looks just menacing, like he is just gonna go around wham, 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 nailing people down with the mace. And the goblin looks like I'm hiccuping. The goblin looks like he is not going to move ever again. He looks like he's perfectly content to spend the rest of his life being a statue. For me, this is absolutely amazing. This card has never been like, we have never had a blue-red just straight up swap effect, something that will actually let you mess around with enchantments. Sure, there are variations of this, but confusion in the ranks doesn't count because it's forced, right? Red never really gets these let's swap kind of abilities. Red usually gets I'm going to take that for a turn. I'm going to active treason your guy. He belongs to me for a turn. But red doesn't get this permanent swap thing. So this is something we really haven't ever seen before in Magic. It's costed at a level that makes it really interesting. And unlike all these other stealing cards, with the exception of shifting loyalties, it lets you take any type of permanent. So even planeswalkers, you can switch planeswalkers around with this. So I think this card actually has the potential to see some genuine play. Things like shifting loyalties were too garbage to ever really genuinely see play. This feels like it's skirting the mana cost that will actually make it playable. I mean, there's a reason that they made it rare, right? And my belief is the reason that it's made rare is the breadth of cards that you can take with it and how cheap it is to cast. So this is something we've never seen before. I personally think this card is a home run in terms of flavor, absolute win in terms of power, totally reasonable to be totally feasible. So let me know what you guys think. We're going to roll the golden scroll. The people have my back on Patreon or through channel memberships. We are welcoming the newest member to the scroll. That is Frederick Gerard. And I just want to give a special shout out as well to Bo Falcon, who is the person who sent me this nice new banner I have on the wall behind me. I do like the look of that. So to all of you, I say thank you for being here, and I will see you guys again soon.